From downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program of public issues and interests. The only public broadcast show on TV or on radio that has extensive interviews with political candidates and the movers and shakers and policymakers in our community. Tonight's guest is David Green. David Green is a candidate for the Democratic U.S. Congress for the 13th District. He is a policy analyst with the prestigious Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs. He seeks the nomination on the Democratic ballot with two other Democratic candidates, Ann Callis of Edwardsville and George Collin of Urbana. The incumbent Republican who occupies the congressional seat right now is Rodney Davis of Taylorville, although Mr. Davis now faces a primary challenge by Erica Harold, a lawyer in Urbana and former Miss America. David Green, our guest this evening, offers a progressive agenda in contrast to the many mainstream Democratic candidates. We all stand to learn something this evening as we question and listen to David Green. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Takes a lot of courage to step up and be a congressional candidate. What prompted you?
Well, I was reading about the two other candidates, and I was sitting on my couch thinking, I've really been studying these issues for a long time and writing about them and being working in the anti-war movement, in the pro-Palestinian justice movement. And it got to the point where I just felt like, why don't I use what I know? People on the left are always saying we just preach to the converted, and I hope that I can use the campaign, not necessarily preaching to the unconverted, but to find out whether the base of the Democratic Party really is a base of the Democratic Party that still aspires to the kind of social welfare and social justice and anti-war views that I would assume they do.
I really admire your willingness to step forward because, as you know, our founding fathers and founding mothers had the belief that political office and being involved in government was part of the civic duty of a citizen. That feeling seems to have long gone.
Yeah, well, money and cynicism and having people busy working long hours and mainstream media will do that to a political culture.
You're offering a very progressive agenda in terms of your views, in contrast to what you would say would be the mainstream Democratic candidates. How does your view on, for example, the jobs issue compare with your opponents?
I think what people need to understand, whether it's politically possible, quote unquote, or not, is that we can have genuine full employment in this country. The federal government can guarantee a job for everyone, a useful and productive job in areas like preschool, in areas like preschools and public schools, and nursing visits for the elderly, and all the kind of things where we have a sort of market-driven system, and you can have a much more public and well-subsidized system. I think that what the federal government should do is put a floor under the job market. It should create good jobs at living wage levels between $15 and $20 per hour, which would only be the minimum wage now if it were reflected gains in productivity, and employ people in ways that not only employ the unemployed, but attract people from other very low-paid service-type jobs, which are dependent on people being desperate because they don't have anywhere else to turn to except to work in fast food or Walmart or so forth for low wages and no benefits.
Sure. Well, what you say is right in that the richest country in the history of mankind, the United States of America, can afford to employ everyone, but the policymakers and the corporate kings don't wish to adopt that policy.
And it's completely understandable in capitalism, in corporate capitalism, in neoliberal capitalism, if you will, that this is what happens. Having a reserve army, having people out of work, lowers wages, it makes people docile workers, and they like that. So people do have to understand that for all the talk about job and job creators and so forth, there's been a rule in this country for a long time that inflation, that it's more important to keep inflation low and keep people out of work than it is to have a little higher inflation and have relatively full employment. And that is related to profits and bond prices and all that stuff. And it's more broadly related to just keeping people quiet, keeping people worrying about their next job instead of feeling like they have the freedom to have a good job or to look for a better job. This is the system that the 1% want.
Yes. Well, the viewpoint that you espouse would be considered by the mainstream to be very radical, and probably points that have never been heard by some members of our audience. How would you propose to get your message out more expansively so that people could understand the underpinnings of what you're saying?
Well, my message is the message that's all over the World Wide Web, and in the websites I read, and on the Green Party website, and even in the Progressive Democrats of America website, and even the Progressive Caucus, the Put America Back to Work program that is supported by people like Barbara Lee and John Conyers and other of the Alan Grayson and the other of the truly liberal to left Democratic congresspersons. So all I can do, why I've been putting out my message by publishing guest commentaries in the newspaper in Urbana-Champaign, the News Gazette for several years. I've said some of these things over and over again, both in letters and in full-length columns of what I'm saying here. And I was kind of surprised when they let me do that, but for whatever reason, they have a sense of fair-minded, even though they're a conservative paper, they have a sense of fair-mindedness about it, or they think that I'm nuts, and by putting my stuff down there, they'll say, look at this lunatic out here. But a lot of people come back to me and say, I've never read anything like that before, and where can I read more of this? And I tell them that you can go to websites like Common Dreams and Counterpunch and ZNet and read economists like Dean Baker or even Paul Krugman. And a lot of what I'm saying at a practical level in terms of putting people back to work is really just not even what radical Marxist economists are saying, but what quote-unquote old-fashioned Keynesian economists are saying about we lost $1 trillion of demand when the housing bubble burst in 2008. That's $1 trillion of productivity that workers are capable of in goods and services that there's no money to buy, and that keeps people out of work, and that ruins people's lives, and it's unnecessary.
Well, as you know, our friends on the right, way back in history, Senator Taft was an archenemy of FDR, and was sure that FDR was a socialist, and his policy were socialist policies.
And I'm calling my campaign a better New Deal, and I'm trying to evoke some of the aspects of the New Deal, of the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, some of these things. It's amazing when we look back in history and see how quickly the federal government can put people to work when it wants to. And idle labor, you can't lose by taking idle people and putting them to productive labor. I mean, there may be limits on high-tech goods that they can buy, but there's not going to be limits on the basics: food, clothing, and shelter. You put money in those hands, people will produce the food, clothing, and shelter that they need. During World War II, we turned automobile factories into building tanks and bomber planes. And we had full employment during World War II, a centralized command economy, not even the kind of economy that I'm talking about here, but we did have a centralized command economy, planned economy during World War II. And then after World War II, they converted the factories back to making cars to provoke the golden age of the 1950s and relatively full employment, higher wages keeping up with productivity, and high union membership.
As you know, David, Decatur has the highest unemployment rate in Illinois. So once you're elected to the 13th district as a congressman, how does your work impact the men and women in our community of Decatur in terms of jobs?
Well, all I can say is this: Anybody who runs for Congress has to say has to look at this country, look at the history of this country, say how they think we got to where we are and where we can go and where we can realistically go, not in a political sense, like who else is going to be in the Congress to help me do this. If I'm the only one who believes this, obviously I'm not going to get it done. And if the president doesn't believe it, it's not going to get done. All we can do is run on the vision we have for this country. That is realistic and possible if the political will were there. And what I'm talking about are things that definitely the political will is there. So all I can do is go to Congress and work with those people who are promoting a massive jobs program in infrastructure, transportation, connectivity, research in a post-carbon era, in sustainable resource and sustainable energy resources, and so forth. All I can do is find those people. But what I can basically do is set an example in East Central Illinois that the people heard what I had to say, they liked what they had to say, they weren't persuaded by the mainstream media that it wasn't realistic to vote for somebody like me, and that I can go to the Congress and say that the people of this district want these programs, and they elected me on this basis. And you know what? In other areas where Democrats are being elected, they can run on that same platform. And if the person who's in there doesn't support that, get another candidate and find out if the people in that district, probably much more liberally minded in many ways than this district, would vote for a candidate like that. So all we can do is set an example and work for a different Congress and work for a different political environment in where it's seen it's possible to elect people who will do these things.
Sure. You know, I think you put your finger on something that I heard a very fine journalist, political journalist, say, that he didn't realize that to understand American politics, you must understand American economics. Mm-hmm. And without a deep understanding of that, you just cannot get the political system. Mm-hmm. But the problem is the economics is so complicated that the average guy and the average lady just feels that they can't understand it.
Well, I fault the mainstream media, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and respectable publications, quote-unquote respectable publications like that, for miseducating the American people about what the state of our economy is. And I'd highly recommend to anybody, if there was really one thing, even of all the books I love and people I love that I wish they would read, the one thing that could inform them on a day-to-day basis of how our economy works and how they're misinformed about it is a blog called Beat the Press by a guy named Dean Baker. It's at CEPR.net. CEPR stands for the Center for Economic and Policy Research. It was founded by Dean and another guy that you read on the web named Mark Weisbrot, who actually has spent some time in Champaign and has some friends there. And if you read that blog, you'll find out that on a daily basis, on a basic level, just in terms of Econ 101 type of understanding, that the mainstream media gets it wrong. You know, and they got it, and one thing that Dean Baker can point to is that he well understood that housing prices were well beyond their track level by the early 2000s, that bubble couldn't keep going without bursting, and that Alan Greenspan, the chair of the Federal Reserve at that time, could have burst it with a few words saying, if this keeps going up like that, I'm going to have to take some measures with the money supply and with the mortgage rules to keep this from happening. People who understand basic history about the fact that home prices have always tracked inflation rates in general understood that housing bubble could not last. Sure. And it certainly didn't. So there's many basic things that are understandable. You don't have to become a Marxist economist. You don't have to understand derivatives and credit default swaps and all those things that helped to ruin the economy in the early 2000s up to 2008. But you can understand that a basic intelligent person can understand some of the basic math and basic analysis that goes into understanding how our system works.
Sure. Although Mr. Greenspan had a great knowledge of economics, he had one overriding ideology, And that was that the free market would solve all the problems.
Yes, but that ideology is hypocrisy on the part of Greenspan and many others like him. Because when you ask him to name what the free market is, he'll name corporations like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, which have always been subsidized by government purchases. So there's a myth of the free market in terms of being, in certain areas, they would like to be free of the regulatory nature of the federal government, such as when they eliminated the Glass-Steagall Act and allowed investment bankers and commercial bankers to operate in the same context. But capitalism in this country has been utterly dependent on government spending and government bailouts since day one, since Alexander Hamilton well understood that, and President Obama well understands that. And so if Alan Greenspan, sometimes you don't know whether these people are smart or stupid or too smart to reveal they're stupid, but they're the free market isn't what this country's built on. And again, World War II showed that, and what happened after World War II showed that to keep the economy going after World War II, they had two choices: social spending or military spending.
Sure.
And they chose military spending, although some of it had a social aspect to it, including research.
Your plan to have full employment, let's take for Decatur, would that require the government to raise taxes to get the money to fund the project?
It may, but it shouldn't. I would say three things. One is that we're wasting $1 trillion a year or so by not having a single-payer universal health care system. We spend $9,000 per person in this country to not cover everyone and to have relatively poor outcomes in relation to other developed countries. So you think of it, and you can think of other developed countries that spend from $4,000 to $7,000. So every $1,000 per person that you knock off health care by making it a universal single-payer system that isn't paying out to health insurance corporations and the pharmaceuticals, every $1,000 times 300 million, that's 300 billion. So you talk about 1,300, 2,600, 3,900. You're getting close to $1 trillion of potential savings that could not easily, in the sense of it's technically complicated, but very, very possible. The other thing is war. I mean, I'm opposed to the military spending and the kind of foreign policy, the empire of bases that we have around the world. It's corporate driven, it's global capitalism driven. There's a good reason for it. It isn't just because the military industrial complex needs the money, but of course they do need the money. And they would prefer to spend money on things that get blown up than things that actually help people. So we could save hundreds of billions of dollars on that, on winding down our military economy. And then beyond that, you could tax the rich in all kinds of ways. The rich in their income and their wealth and their offshore tax havens, and the Wall Street, the Tobin tax, the financial transaction tax on Wall Street. You can get hundreds of billions, if not $1 or $2 trillion of dollars in various ways. That should mean that we wouldn't have to go into any more debt, but I would say that even if that stuff couldn't happen, it would benefit the economy, and it wouldn't drive up inflation rates, and it wouldn't do anything harmful to actually spend another stimulus package of $1 trillion, even if it put us into more debt to put people back to work. Because once you get the economy going again, then the debt relative to the economy starts to shrink, because people are working and people are paying taxes and people are making stuff and providing stuff.
So by making those adjustments, that would fund full employment for, say, Decatur.
Absolutely. I mean, people may think it sounds like pie in the sky, but I just have to keep stressing that these things are practically and physically possible. Mm-hmm. They're possible in a developed economy like ours. We are twice as wealthy per capita as we were in 1970. What that means, and people again understand how the basic analysis works, adjusted for inflation, the per capita production or income, depending on how you look at it, it's just more or less the same thing, is twice as much as it was in 1970. It's doubled in 40 years. It's because people work in a more productive way. It doesn't mean that people are more morally superior. It means they have better tools. they're educated to use those tools, and we all know how much more productive anybody working in an office or factory or doing many other things with high tech and so forth was than they were 40 years ago. That means that we have twice as much productivity to play around with. And what are we doing? What are we doing with that? Is it going to the rich and the 1%? Yes. It doesn't mean that twice as much means that everybody should be getting paid twice as much or live in twice as big a house or have twice as many cars. What it does mean as we transition from manufacturing, which Decatur obviously is archetypal, transition from a manufacturing economy to a service economy, we need to do this in a planned way. Are we going to transition to a high-paid service economy with jobs in teaching and preschools and home health care and transportation, public transportation, and so forth? Or are we going to transition, as we already have, into the low-wage service Walmart fast food economy? And are we going to take some of the benefits for that productivity in a shorter work week and a longer vacation time and things like that, which is one way of paying ourselves. We don't always have to pay ourselves with more things and stuff to be productive. We can pay ourselves with more leisure time to contribute to society in other ways. With a 3-day weekend, people would be able to get involved in more voluntary civic activity, or people would be able to spend more time with their family or pursue hobbies that produce things that are not of exchange value, that are monetary value, but have use value. So you're moving towards a different kind of society. Beyond that, the time to be involved in civic affairs and to spend the time to understand the politics and the civics, and to serve on the kind of boards that I always see retired people serving on the local public library boards and parks boards and so forth.
Well, as you know, the American workers work the longest hours of any workers on the planet.
Yeah, and we're an overworked country. We're a tired country. We're an unhealthy country in a lot of ways, and again, the 1% likes that. They like for people to be working 2 jobs, to be going home, to not be able to afford to buy healthy food, and to be too exhausted to do anything except to watch mainstream media. And people, I don't put all the blame. People have choices and people are responsible, but these are social forces, and these are powerful social forces. And when the majority of the society is behaving in certain ways, it's not usually because of something inside of them. It's because of something outside of them. And the idea is to get people to blame themselves if they're out of work when it's not their fault. Sure, there's some lazy people around, but that's not why people are out of work.
David, when I think you use the word exhausted, I have some friends. One friend works 12-hour shifts at Tate & Lyle at a production plant here in Decatur, and every time she thinks about that those 3 days she's going to have 12, she just almost gets depressed. I have another friend who works in the medical profession as a pulmonologist, doing 12-hour shifts also, and it's just exhausting and depressing.
In Germany, they have what's called work sharing or job sharing. During the turndown in 2008, instead of putting people out of work, the government subsidized businesses to go to a 4-day work week and keep people working, but working less. And so they subsidized their pay so they could get the same pay for working 4-day work weeks. Just a practical thing like that. And again, the reason we don't have it isn't because it's not practical. It's because when you get all those people working, then they see that there's nobody standing in line to take their job, they start looking for better jobs, or they start asking for more pay and better working conditions at the job that they're working at. They start asking for more control of the workplace and so forth, and they see that the employees are going to have to deal with them. And it's interesting to find out that during World War II, when there was full employment, strikes were rampant. Even in the midst of all this unity and patriotism and everybody sacrificing, workers in factories struck a lot because they wanted to get more out of what the workers, and that's what scared the employees so much after World War II. That's partly why the Taft-Hartley bill, the anti-union Taft-Hartley, you mentioned Taft before, was passed in 1947. Under Harry Truman, that's a different story. he lays some blame. He deserves some blame for that as well.
David, it's been a fascinating conversation. You've raised issues and points and information not heard anywhere, as you mentioned, on the media. Where can people get in touch with you for your campaign here in Decatur?
My website is davidgreenforcongress.com. You can connect to my Facebook page from the website and like me on Facebook. You can join my email list and email me at davidgreenforcongress@gmail.com. And when you go on my website, you can look at my Issues tab, which repeats or summarizes some of the things I've said this evening. And you also look on the Media tab, which has not only my things about my current media, but also links to the articles that I've written over the years, over the last 10 years or so, about various issues, including much more about foreign policy.
David, thank you very much. Good luck with your campaign.
Thanks. It was great to be here.